On the 26th of December, 1784, the ship United States of America, 350 tons in weight, commanded by Captain Thomas Bell, manned by 39 crew, mounted by 8 guns, and loaded with cargoes consisting of tobacco, coffee, Virginia ginseng, naval stores, and a great number of silver coins, arrived at Madras. Lord Macartney, governor of Madras from 1781 to 85, considered the arrival of the Yankee merchants and mariners an extraordinary event for the Indian Ocean trade and commerce. On the significance of this episode, he made an elaborate report to Governor-General Warren Hastings. Macartney concluded his report with a prophecy: the event portends a considerable revolution in the commerce of India. The American participation in Indian trade did, in fact, herald a revolution in the existing commercial system, but ironically it took place not in colonial India, as Macartney anticipated, but in New England of the United States of America. America's first industrial revolution began in New England visibly in 1815, and got its necessary entrepreneurial initiatives and capital inputs from the India trade adventures of New England. American Revolution and the early days of independent America. The 13 colonies of America before independence were not allowed to make any direct overseas trading contact with any nation other than the mother country, the United Kingdom. Nor the American colonists themselves were very eager to join overseas trade. Among all the states of America, only 7 New England states were active in foreign trade. It was for the contemporary ideological prejudice that the best way to lead a good life was to follow husbandry, which Jesus, as they believed, liked all to follow. Besides, the U.S. federal Constitution provided that foreign trade relations would be dealt with not by the federal government, but by the respective constituent states. As a result, no European state, including Britain, was inclined to make trading deals separately with every constituent state of the USA. For the time being, John Adams, the U.S. ambassador to London and later president of the USA from 1797 to 1801, suggested a solution to the problem. He was informed by various private Indian trade interests in London about the great prospects of America's participation in the Indian Ocean trade, which implied no diplomatic problem. He thus wrote to John Jay, the U.S. Secretary for Foreign Affairs, "Necessity would force us to carry our trade where we could find a market for our produce, and if England and Europe would not receive it upon living terms, we must carry it to the East Indies." Vision of the Founding Fathers. Adams also advanced the idea of establishing a kind of American East India Company in the model of the various East India Companies of Europe for pursuing the Oriental trade. George Washington's Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, an ardent exponent of foreign trade, supported the idea. But though the Congress endorsed his proposal for joining the Indian Ocean trade, they turned down his proposal for founding a kind of American East India Company on the ground that pursuing capitalist competition was inconsistent with the spirit of the American Revolution. As a state policy, physiocracy, which the colonists had been practicing as an ideology for a long time, was still the ruling idea among the majority of them. Most leaders, including President George Washington, believed in the physiocratic principle of production and distribution, and not of foreign enterprise and competition, and the consequent growth of capitalism and international hostilities. Adams and Hamilton were, of course, influenced by the mercantilist vested interests in London, who convinced them that America could immensely profitably pursue clandestine trade through which the British civilian and military officials hitherto sent home their ill-gotten fortune in the form of cargoes sent in continental ships for sale in Europe, and ultimate disbursement in cash in England. Adams was provided with all the details about the various aspects of the most profitable carrying trade, which America could easily take advantage of with enormous profit. The shipping of the monopoly companies of Europe was never adequate to carry all the goods that they were required to import from India for distributing them for sale to overseas markets. The Americans could join the business in the form of renting out their ships to carry the cargo to Europe and other overseas destinations. Adams thus wrote to U.S. Foreign Secretary John Jay from 1784 to 90, a founding father of the Revolution and president of the Continental Congress, to participate in trading overseas. Development of trade and commerce. Among all the Americans who followed physiocratic economy, the Yankees of New England were most commercial and eager to join the Indian Ocean trade immediately after independence. Robert Morris of Philadelphia, a signatory to the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, and a financier of the American Revolution, was the first entrepreneur to organize and join the Indian Ocean trade. His Empress of China left New York for the Indian Ocean in February 1784. Within 4 weeks of the departure of the Empress of China, navigator Thomas Bell led the ship United States for the Bay of Bengal trade. The ship Hydra, owned by Chaplin of Rhode Island, arrived at Bengal port Hughley in June 1785. Elias Haskett Derby of Salem, Massachusetts, was the first person to send a series of ships to the Indian Ocean and sustain the adventure to the last, thus becoming the founder of American foreign commerce in the Indian Ocean world. He survived the early odds and continued to send ships to the Bay of Bengal. His ships started coastal trading in India first, and it proved to be immensely profitable. In 1788, some 9 of his ships operated in various ports of the Bay of Bengal. The profits that he made from Indian Ocean voyages made him the first millionaire in the United States of America. The first American ship to enter the Bay of Bengal was the merchant ship, the United States. She was cleared from Philadelphia and mastered by Thomas Bell and entered the Bay of Bengal waters in December 1784. However, the first American ship to arrive at Calcutta for trade and commerce was the Hydra from Rhode Island. Commanded by John Hagee, the Hydra arrived in June 1785. The Fort William government reluctantly allowed the ship to land her cargo since they didn't want to furnish the U.S. government with any excuse to be retaliated. Though the Court of Directors and Fort William government were previously served with intelligence about the plan of American merchants to enter the company's territory in Bengal, the colonial government didn't make any specific policy about the modality of prospective American participation in Calcutta trade. They didn't even believe that the Americans would be so adventurous to participate in the Bengal trade and make any profit out of it. They became more astounded when another ship, Chesapeake from Providence and headed by John O'Donnell, arrived in autumn 1787. On September 3, 1791 had arrived the ship Enterprise, commanded by Babcock. She was also allowed to unload herself. She did not, however, make any significant purchases and left Calcutta on November 1st for the Malabar coast. From such occasional visits of American merchants to Calcutta, the East India Company found no threat to its monopoly interests, and looked at these casual visits to Bengal more exploratory rather than real. Though the trading contact was set up in 1785, actual trade transactions remained very nominal until the beginning of the Continental War in 1793. Only a couple of ships came to Calcutta during the period, and their transactions were also very casual and insignificant. However, the irregular pattern of America's Calcutta trade took a new turn from the beginning of the French Revolutionary War in Europe in early 1793. Britain and France, 2 major colonial powers in the East, were at war, which was destined to last at varying scales until the fall of Napoleon. During the period, America, as a neutral power, got a unique opportunity to establish its influence in the Bay of Bengal trade. Within a decade of their entry into Indian trade, the New England merchants emerged as great partners in the Indian Ocean trade. The following table of transactions made at the port of Calcutta indicates how fast the growth of the Yankee trade was with Bengal. Thus, the total American trade for the 10-year period beginning from 1795 to 1796 exceeded by about 1/4 that was carried on under the flags of all overseas partners, including European nations. The major item of America's import from Calcutta was piece goods, which they bought not only for the domestic market, but also for extensive re-exporting. However, these figures give a small picture of America's real performance in Indian trade, because these are only the totals of very incomplete and partial records. We have no records for America's performance at Serampore, Tranquebar, and other non-British ports. There is no way to make any idea of America's income from coasting trade, carrying trade to Sumatra, Mauritius, and Europe, opium smuggling to China, and most importantly, re-exports to many regions and countries. America maintained neutrality in the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars from 1790 to 1815. Hence, for safety, the European colonial powers and other India traders very frequently engaged neutral American vessels for transporting their goods between Europe and their colonies in the East. The India traders of Europe found it prudent to use neutral American bottoms in carrying their goods across the Indian Ocean. Thus, Carrying trade, which involved nominal capital, became the principal source of income during the European War era. In meeting the progressively new demand, thus developed the shipbuilding industry in New England, particularly seaworthy ships. The merchant houses like Elia Haskett Derby of Salem and Moses Brown of Providence, Rhode Island and many others became the first millionaires of America from India trade. Due to data problems, it may not be ever possible to quantify accurately the profit margins of American trade in the Bay of Bengal region. But we may well imagine the impact that the Yankee traders made on American life and economy when we look at the material changes in New England. Citing the great contributions of India trade to the transformation of New England, Benjamin Pickman, a member of the House of Representatives and himself a major India merchant, remarked in the House in 1819, "The benefits of the commerce of the United States, which have been enumerated, are not deduced from any theoretical reasoning. They are established by 30 years' experience since the Constitution was adopted." At that time our capital was small and had suffered for a series of years a continual diminution. Our agriculture was depressed and our finances were embarrassed. The changes, which a thrifty commerce during this period has contributed to produce, are so striking that they are scarcely required to be stated. There is not a single portion of the country that has not felt its beneficial influence. On the seaboard, we have everywhere flourishing towns and cities, the busy haunts of industry, where the products of our soil are accumulated on their transit to foreign countries. In the interior, hundreds of towns have arisen, which but a few years since were desolate waste or dreary forests. The agriculture of the old states has grown up and spread itself in 1,000 new directions, and our cotton and our wheat, our tobacco and our provisions are administering to the wants of millions to whom even our very name was but a short time ago utterly unknown. The series of events like continental and colonial wars, embargo on foreign trade and commerce in 1807, the Anglo-American War of 1812 to 1814, and seizures of American ships on the high seas on an ever-increasing scale shattered the prospect of continuing further America's Bengal trade. Furthermore, the restoration of peace was sure to deprive the American merchants of the advantages that they had been enjoying, especially in carrying and remittance trade. The abolition of the monopoly status of the East India Company in 1813 was sure to flood India with British free traders with whom American merchants must compete. The discontinuation of carrying trade and remittance trade rendered hundreds and thousands of people and their vessels unemployed. Re-exporting would virtually stop on the ground that South America, the West Indies, and many African colonies would set up direct business contacts with India, and in fact they did after the Peace Treaty of 1815. All these developments led a large section of the India trade interests of New England, headed by Francis Cabot Lowell and Tracy Jackson, to give new thought about the changing conditions of world affairs and their impact on the American economy in general and the economy of the traditional India trade in particular. The Yankee merchants led by Francis Cabot Lowell, the owner of the India Wharf at Boston, and Tracy Jackson and Nathan Appleton formed an informal committee, which later came to be known as the Boston Associates, to make a new plan of using their mercantile capital more profitably and of course more securely. The Boston Associates decided to withdraw their capital from Calcutta trade and invest it alternatively in the development of industries at home in a corporate manner, an unknown phenomenon indeed in the history of America. Lowell, Jackson, and Appleton led the movement for transforming America's economy from the existing agricultural to industrial economy. The very first textile factory of the Boston Company of Waltham, established in 1813, was the first joint stock company of America. The original shares were 100, the price of each share was $1,000, and the authorized limit of capital being $400,000. The founding directors were all India merchants, and the entire paid-up capital came from the Boston Associates, who were 14 in number and all from India trade. The Boston Associates made amazing contributions to promoting the process of industrialization. They founded a new city, Lowell, named after the chief of the Associates. The new city of Lowell was located along the Pawtucket Falls of the Merrimack River, providing water power to textile mills. It grew into a very large textile city in America and came to be honored as the cradle of the American Industrial Revolution.